For many years at AEQ, I worked in the border community of Ambos Nogales in support of the EPA U.S.-Mexico Border 2020 program. So that program was established shortly after NAFTA to make funding available to grassroots efforts and communities and NGOs to try to mitigate some of the environmental impacts from the North American Free Trade Agreement all along the U.S.-Mexico border. So I chaired the Arizona-Sonora Water Task Force for EPA on behalf of AEQ, but most of my time was spent in the Ambos Nogales sub-watershed, located about 65 miles south of Tucson, in the upper Santa Cruz River watershed, as you can see here. And I don't know if you guys up in Phoenix get many reports about flooding in Ambos Nogales, but it's a pretty interesting place, particularly for hydrologists. It's got a lot of steep terrain, it's been severely overdeveloped, and it's a relatively small watershed. So when it rains, the time of concentration is very short. You get massive floods that impact the downtown community. Then of course you've got border infrastructure that compounds those issues even more. It's a study into it and a presentation unto itself, frankly. So when it rains, all that water basically comes rushing down the washes, which are hosting not only the roadways for Nogales, but they also host wastewater infrastructure that runs underneath the streets. So when those floods come, they carry a lot of sediment from the surrounding hills. All that sediment gets introduced into the sewer conveyance system, and then the reason AEQ is interested, of course, is because we get sanitary sewer overflows. And those sanitary sewer overflows concentrate in the lowest point of the watershed, which happens to be the Nogales Wash, which flows into Arizona. And then we get a mix of not only sanitary waste, but we also get industrial contaminants because Nogales, Sonora is host to over 100 maquiladoras. So I'm not here to talk about Nogales, Sonora, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background on how I got turned on to water harvesting. So working for the EPA Border 2020 program, one of the areas we explored was green infrastructure to help not only offset some of those at least higher frequency return period flood events, but also create sensitivity in the community about where infrastructure is located and why water harvesting is important. But I live in Tucson. My backyard is about 6 miles north of downtown Tucson. I live in Sweetwater in the foothills. And this is just to kind of give you an idea of what my community looks like. So our footprint for Sweetwater in the foothills is about 162 acres. And we're very similar to Nogales, Sonora in that we have a very topographically rich area. You can see that we have 2 washes there in lighter blue that feed into Roger Wash. It's interesting that in my community, we encounter many of the same things that Nogales, Sonora encounters, although by no means on the same scale. But I realized that a lot of the strategies that we're implementing in Nogales, Sonora might be applicable to my own backyard and my own community. And I decided to approach my homeowners association, the board, with an idea for money-saving opportunities through water harvesting and erosion control. Now, although environmental sustainability and non-point source pollution control and all those things are important to me personally, one thing that I've learned is when you're talking to people across a wide variety of political spectrums, the one thing that resonates is money. So if you can tie something that you're interested in to money, people are usually much more open and receptive to the idea of exercising your ideas. So what I did was I highlighted this community known as the Milagro Co-Housing Community in Tucson, Arizona, which is only a couple miles away from where I live. And what they've done is when they built their community, they installed a whole suite of basins along the inside of the community so that when it rains, they can actually capture all that rainfall rather than have it run off the community, and they can put it to beneficial use. So this is what the community looked like when it was first established. You can see those water harvesting basins. And then I found some photos online that were taken by one of the community members, and he actually did a time lapse of how the community and the vegetation was responding to these water harvesting basins over time. That was pretty cool, and I thought, I'm going to share this with my HOA, but I also reached out to him and said, do you have anything more recent? Because this was back in 2013. That last picture was taken in 2008. And David did reply, and he said, I stopped taking pictures because I didn't have a view of the mountains anymore, because we had so much vegetation that was growing in response to all this harvested rainwater, it didn't make much sense. And I said, wow, that's a lot of vegetation. I said, you must be watering. And this was his response. He basically said that they water only when they feel that the vegetation needs it. And occasionally during the year, monsoons are a big help in the summer and not so much in the wintertime when plants are dormant. So I brought this back to my HOA and I said, maybe we can take advantage of all this stormwater that's causing problems for us and put it to beneficial use. So rather than have me make the recommendations, I thought it'd be good to get a neutral outside party to come in and do a site assessment on behalf of the HOA. So we hired Watershed Management Group to come in, and they went ahead and they took a look at our problem and they said, your solution is fairly easy. All you really need to do is build a few basins on the side of your walking paths, take that excavated material, use it to build some swales and berms, and elevate, very gently, maybe by a couple inches, the pathway, so that when it rains, that water can go into these adjacent basins, add a little bit of infiltration, soil moisture to that area, which in turn can support native vegetation. So back in 2014, with the approval of the board, we funded WMG to actually get their co-op to come out and help us out. Not only the WMG co-op, and WMG is an amazing organization, but also bring in some of our own community members from our HOA. So this was right before the groundbreaking, and we started doing exactly what WMG suggested we do under their supervision. We started digging out basins along the sides of our walking paths, and then we would backfill them with mulch. Now, it was a great experience. I got to know a bunch of my neighbors. We installed water harvesting features all throughout problem areas in our HOA, but I realized that in order for this to be sustainable, we really needed to set up some kind of a committee. The reason being that we needed to have some kind of a charter, and we had to have some kind of guidance to come out and maintain these features over time. So the board approved the creation of a water harvesting and erosion control committee, and that's basically our charter. That's what we're tasked to do. And the important thing about this is what it did is it gave volunteers in our community the legitimacy to go out into common areas and maintain as well as install new water harvesting features where they were necessary, which is something that would have been unheard of before. Hey, we're some volunteers, we're going to dig basins in common areas. They would have never allowed that. But with this background now, we went ahead and had that in our charter. Not only that, we also worked on private property. Hey, we're a committee. We knocked on people's doors and we said, hey, we noticed you have a lot of runoff coming off your property and it's impacting some of our common areas. We'd like to volunteer our time to help install some features to slow that down and increase infiltration, and that will contribute to vegetation. It can help improve your property values. Nobody ever said no. And then the next thing we did is we inventoried everything that we had installed, because people move away from our community, and for sustainability, we have to know where these features are, because sometimes they can blend in very nicely with the landscape, because we're just talking about gentle contours. So we created, back in 2016, we created an inventory. The inventory is actually much greater than this right now, just so we'd know where all these features are and we could revisit them and maintain them as needed. And then we also, this really started to take off in our community. People knew what we were doing from going to board meetings, and they started hiring private contractors to come out to their own homes and do water harvesting on their own private property. And we have several instances of this happening in our HOA, and when that would happen, we would go out and we would take pictures and we would highlight them in the community newsletter so that word would get out about this technology and these possibilities moving forward. So this is something that I learned from Brad Lancaster. This is a little picture that he has out in front of his home. These changes that happen in the landscape, they can take a long time and happen very slowly. It's always a good idea to get before and after pictures to really show the scale of change over time. So I'm going to show you some before and after pictures. The before pictures are associated with us taking an inventory of problem areas. The after pictures are 3 years later, when for that particular year, the rainfall was actually much less than the before. I know that vegetation is not a precise way to measure change, but you'll see that overall the cover has improved in our HOA in response to the features that we've installed. So this is over by our community pool area, downstream of a parking lot. This is what it looked like in 2018, around the same time. February 2015, so we kind of slowed down the water coming off the parking lot, planted some new trees. That's what it looked like in 2018. And I really wanted to show you pictures from 2021, but that would have been cheating because we had so much rain this year that everything is a jungle out there right now. This is a downstream of that parking lot, a head cut that was forming. And we went in and we put in trincheras and one rock dams, and that's what it looks like in 2018. There's that little area right there. It's a hopseed bush that was installed. This is this little head cut's associated with our pool discharge from the filter. So we went ahead and we rocked it. And this is that picture that I showed you earlier. Look how bare the sides of this walkway are, and this is what it looks like today. Here's another one. So we lowered the elevation on the sides of this little path. We applied mulch, and then we put native seed cert, and that's what it looks like today. And this is I actually went out to Pima County Flood Control, and I said, we have all these drainages that kind of bifurcate our neighborhood. Who's responsible for maintaining those? And they informed us that you, the HOA, are responsible for maintaining those particular drainages if they're head cutting. So you can see here we have this rock apron where a head cut was developing up into the rock apron, and we were losing that material into the drainage. So we used that material to install a little rock plug right there. And now sediment is accumulating back there, which is creating a natural sponge, which is hosting vegetation. That's the same one right after we installed it. That's what it looks like in 2018. If you look at it now, you can't even see this rock feature. It's just covered in Palo Verdes, the wildflowers. It's just unbelievable. Like, here's that one on private property. So I think overall, the committee's done a pretty good job of helping with erosion in our community, but we didn't want to stop there. We wanted to take it, we are, after all, the Water Harvesting and Erosion Control Subcommittee. So we decided to look at what we could do to save water. Now we're legitimate, right? We've got a committee, we've got a charter, and this is one of the things that we included in our charter was to say, hey, our community is full of desert natives. They're on drip, which is kind of odd. These plants do just fine on their own out in the desert. But if we're going to have them on drip, let's at least monitor the watering schedule and provide feedback on how we can better water in the hopes of saving water over time. In order to do that, I quickly discovered that there were older members of the community who actually knew where our water meters were located and what areas were being irrigated. Because when you're part of an HOA, you just hand all this stuff off to the landscapers and to a management company and you forget about it, right? So nobody really knew. So I had to sit down with some of the older board members and actually map this out, create a map, and kind of give myself a digital idea, something that would help me engage Tucson Water to do a desktop audit of our water use. And this is a program, a great program offered by Tucson Water. They'll actually go over your water usage over time and they'll make recommendations on what you can do to improve your efficiency with respect to watering. You can see the feedback that we got here is that we had an irrigation scheduling problem, that we weren't really following any basic scientific guidelines for irrigating our common areas. And nobody would really think about that. You look at the common areas, they look fine, but we're actually paying money for that water that's being used. Again, trying to tie things back to economic incentives. So we went back and we shared that information with the board and with the landscapers. And we said, we really need to take a closer look at this. And I went back and I took all the water bills over the last year and I said, okay, this is going to be our baseline for consumption. Let's see how consumption changes over time. It's really our way of keeping an eye on the landscapers to make sure that they are actually following through on Tucson Water's recommendations. And we continued collecting data. Actually, I got this updated through just last month. And we wanted to see how do we do in 2017 versus a baseline that was established in 2016. can see we saved 48,000 gallons, relatively speaking. That doesn't sound like a lot. Actually, we saved close to 200,000 gallons that year, but we have one meter that's highlighted in red there that our landscapers had unfortunately left open, and it had been running for days. So almost an entire year's worth of water savings had been lost. But this is good. You know, we're going to take this as a learning experience, and what we started doing was generating monthly reports for the board, saying, hey, you know, we're comparing this year's usage to last year's usage. This meter looks a little off. And then the common area committee chair would actually share these reports with the landscapers and say, hey, you guys got to take a closer look at this meter. And so there's this constant monthly feedback mechanism to say, hey, you know, we need to tweak this meter a little bit. Hey, we had a monsoon the other day. Why is the drip irrigation still on? You know, we had to basically establish that rapport. And when we look at 2018 versus 2017, this time we're actually starting to see some real savings. So that investment in time is starting to pay off. You can see that we saved 656,788 gallons. That's great. The way I like to think about that, though, is there's got to be a better way to visualize that much water, right? So water harvesting is big in Tucson, and you can buy these tanks, right? These big plastic tanks and install them, outside your home. It costs about $900. Well, if I take that 657,000 gallons and divide it by the 411 homes in our community, it comes out to about 1,600 gallons per household. That's the same as buying everybody in our community a 1,500 gallon water harvesting tank. But the difference is we did it through simple conservation without having to spend a lot of money, $900 on a tank, buying a lot of plastic. So that's a very compelling metric for me over the course of 1 year. The other thing we did was we shared everything that we had been doing with the National Wildlife Federation, because we're creating these native habitats that are ideal for wildlife, for birds, for butterflies. Everything in our common area is basically native planting. And we looked at their criteria for becoming National Wildlife Certified, and we actually became the first community in the state of Arizona to become National Wildlife Federation Certified. That's important because it gave us the legitimacy to put this nice big sign at the entrance of our community. And what does this do? This actually helps us improve property values. People now come to our community, they see that sign and they say, seems like a nice place to live, and that helps. So not only are we beautifying the community by taking advantage of that stormwater to green bare areas, but we have other lures that people might be interested in for supporting real estate values. So I took all the data that's been collected, and I'm learning R right now, and I decided to see if I could create some simple graphs to show what's happened over the last 5 years. And here you can see in 2016 versus 2020, I'm looking at calendar year totals here. You can see that meters 43310 and 43322, that we've really dropped our consumption on those 2 meters. And the other reason that's happening is because now everybody's aware of this, so when we're walking out there and people see a leak in the drip irrigation system, somebody's on the phone to me or to the homeowners association or to a board member, sends an email, and they're on top of it quick. So that's paying dividends as well, as you can see in the decreased water use over time. But let's sum all these meters together. So this basically shows how water use has decreased in our community between 2016 and 2020. It looks like we're flatlining a little bit at between about 900 CCFS. Still, 900 CCFS is more than half of what we were consuming back in 2016, when nobody was even looking at this issue, when we were just letting stormwater run off our streets and we were paying landscapers to reapply DG or fix problem areas. This is the cost. So you can see that for those first 2 meters, we more than halved the money that we were spending on those particular meters over time. And if we sum them over time, we went from paying close to $13,000 a year for common area watering to about $9,000. So in 2021 is looking even better, but I don't have the full year's data, so I didn't want to throw it on this graph. And these are the totals. If we use 2016 as our baseline, And we say, all right, if we had done nothing, let's just assume that this is what our water consumption would have been over time. And we look at how things have changed. I think it's safe to say that we saved 2,700,000 gallons of water over the last 5 years. And that translated to a cost savings of $11,503 at a time in Tucson when water rates are increasing. We're paying less money year after year. Very little sacrifice. Our common areas are beautiful. Now, I'm not going to delude myself. I mean, I realize that 2,700,000 gallons is really a drop in the proverbial bucket of the problems that we're facing with Lake Mead. No question about it. But it's a drop going where it's supposed to go. Rather than losing it, we're actually taking advantage of this, and we're putting it to beneficial use, and we're improving property values. We're also building community. I've gotten to know 2 people in my community very well, and I see them when I'm on walks, and we talk about water harvesting, and that's something that I didn't have before 2016. So there are all these ancillary benefits associated with water harvesting that I hadn't even considered. Now, I learned a lot over the last 8 years, and I'm not going to go over all these bullets. Don't worry. But what I will do is I will highlight 2 bullets that if you're interested in doing this in your own HOA, these are probably 2 of the most important things that you can do, right? Keep the community informed about what you're doing. Do it through HOA newsletters. Do it by going to board meetings. Let them know that you're watching. Let them know that you're monitoring water usage over time. And you know, water savings are certainly important for the environment. That's where my heart is. I'm not so much interested in money, but cost savings is something that cuts across all political spectrums. So highlight the cost savings. The cost savings are there, and it really makes a difference in terms of gaining support. So I just want to let you know, if you're interested in this, or if you'd like to try adopting it in your own community, I've got an older version of this presentation, a little bit more detailed. If you go to the YouTube search engine and you type modest acre sustainability, there's a link there for HOAs and overlooked water sustainability opportunity. You'll recognize some of the slides from this presentation. And there's also an environmental sustainability playlist. So I'm kind of an environmental guy. It's something I really enjoy. So in that playlist, I talk about where you can find 55-gallon drums, clean ones, good ones, and how to convert them into water harvesting for storage. I talk about building bee condos. And we all know that mulch is important for saving water. But I read this in a book, and I'm curious naturally, and I'm like, well, wait, how important is it? So I went out and I bought some microcontrollers, and I actually monitored water harvesting basins before and after mulch application. And it's huge, the difference that a 1-inch layer of mulch can do. It's been measured, and there's a video in this playlist if you'd like to learn more about it. So on that note, 2.7 million gallons saved and counting. This is only through 2020. There's my contact information, and I'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.